Hi, it's Greg Schinkel, President of Unique Training and Development and Frontline Leadership Systems, and I'm here with General Manager Kirk Langford. Kirk?
Hey.
This is a bit different for us.
This is, yeah.
Kirk, as you know, is the host of one of our podcasts, the Leader Feeder podcast, along with Suzanne Jakes, our marketing coordinator, and I, of course, do the Accelerating Operational Performance podcast, and we thought, what a great time to start to look back at some of the favorite episodes.
Yeah, exactly. We thought, we launched the podcast in April, as you know, and so far it's been well received. We've gotten lots of good feedback about what people are liking and listening to, and we thought, what a cool opportunity. We're kind of at the end of the year now. We're getting ready to start 2025. So what a cool chance to take a look back at some of those more popular episodes, dive into them a little bit. There's always these little nuggets you get when you're listening, especially sometimes when you listen the second or third time, you go, oh my gosh, I hadn't caught that the first time. So that's exactly right. We wanted to do a little bit of a look back and a highlight of some of those really great clips throughout the year.
Yeah, and I know I enjoyed going back because sometimes when you're actually doing the interviews, you're so focused on what you're doing, you're not really thinking about everything you're hearing. And I go back to the very first episode of the Accelerating Operational Performance podcast, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to first look at a clip from your interview with Ben Whitney. Maybe you want to remind the audience a little bit about Ben and what your episode was about, and then we can dive into the clip.
Yeah, sounds good. So Ben is someone I've known for a long time since he purchased the business from his father. And in fact, his father was a client of ours. So I've always admired Ben, and he agreed to be the very first guest on AOP, and we launched with a bang. And I remember specifically, he had this great insight about people and involving them. And so let's have a look.
One of the things that I did that worked really well is I did a survey for every employee, and it was just a simple 2-page, and what it said was, what's 2 or 3 small ideas for improvement and 1 or 2 big ideas for improvement. And I gave a couple of examples of what those might be. And I told people that they could, that this could be anonymous, but I was really impressed. The vast majority of people returned it with their names on it. And then we created a list of all of their suggestions. And then we really worked on knocking a bunch of those off. And the great thing was that it gave us a mandate to do a lot of things that we already had on our list, but now it was the team's ideas. And because there was some anonymous ones, we could also sneak 1 or 2 ideas onto the list that really came from myself and the new management team.
There is so much to unpack with that. I think it's a very short clip. I think it's only about a minute, but there are just so many good little tidbits there. One of the things I really like is this idea of you as a leader already have things that you want to implement. You've got some ideas, but why not try and bring the team in on it so that it's not everything coming from the boss or the leader? So that's the first thing already that I really liked, but I know you've got some thoughts of what you like about that as well.
Well, in our frontline leadership program, we always talk about how the best coach-like leaders are the ones who clarify expectations, involve their team, and build on positives. And so Ben was definitely leading by example because he was asking his team for suggestions or improvement. And he said something really interesting. He said, these were some of the same ideas we could have just proposed, but by asking them in the survey and then throwing it back to the employees giving the ideas, it really gave them credit, and that builds in greater commitment.
Yeah, it's true that there's so many times where employees, a leader might come in and see an idea or an initiative and go, we should do this. And then you've got these people that have already been around before the leader came in going, yeah, hello, I've said that before. This isn't the first time, and sort of feel like no one's listening to them. So what a great way to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone or have a win-win situation, because now the employee's going to go, this is something that I've wanted to be done or wanted to see get done. It's now getting done. And the leader also wanted it, but then like you said, that credit's there. So I think that's just a really cool thing. I also liked his kind of ingenious little, because it was anonymous, you can also have some of your own stuff in there that maybe you wouldn't have put in if it was, hey, everybody put up your hand and share your ideas out loud. So I think there's just a wealth of stuff.
Yeah. Now, one cautionary note, because I think sometimes managers think I've got to always implement the ideas that the employees give me. And it didn't have to happen that way. They could choose what they were sharing or even say that some of the ideas weren't viable. So just because you ask for ideas does not mean you should take bad ideas and implement them. Yeah. You're looking, though, to see if you can cast the net for really good ideas and suggestions from the people who are closest to the work.
Yeah. As I think about that, the other thing I like about what he said was he asked for some bigger, longer term, big picture ideas and some smaller ones. And I think that plays a little little bit into what you're saying, which is some people might come with a whole bunch of really big picture, long-term ideas. And as the leader, you're going, okay, sure, we want to implement maybe not all of it, but some of it. But we also know that these are big picture, long-term ideas. Those are going to take a long time. Yeah. So you get some of the small, quick wins, probably not all of them, but you also get some of the big picture ones. I also wonder that because you're sharing them maybe with the team, they're all going to see, oh, there's no way we can implement all of this in a month or 6 months or even a year. So then that helps probably give you a little bit of ability to say, there were lots of great ideas. Yeah. We're not going to go ahead with all of them. If not just because of this, but primarily also because there are just so many. There's no way we could do all of this at once anyway.
Yeah, so Ben did a great job as we expected him to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So next, I was thinking about the episode that you did with Phil Taco. It was a little bit after the one with Ben Whitney, and I really liked that episode. I mean, I've worked with Phil just like you have for a little while. He's a really wonderful guy, and so I was excited to hear his episode. And kind of similarly to Ben, he talked a little bit about, I would say, employee engagement, how to keep them on board. And the interesting thing of one of the points he brought up was about how you have to sort of leverage and understand the power of people as much as the power of technology.
Yeah, and I think it's probably even more powerful knowing that Phil has a very technical background. Yeah. And he even talked about early in his career, if you go back and watch that episode, he really talks about earlier in his career how informative it was to realize that all problems are not technical problems. There's a people component as well.
And even a problem that does seem technical may also end up being a people problem. Even though it seems like it might be a machine or a process, it may actually be a people problem you need to work out from that perspective. We should mention as well as we're going through this that we're going to put the links to all of these episodes that we're chatting about in the show notes. So for those listening or watching and thinking, oh, I want to check out the rest of that episode, that sounds cool, we are going to have those in the show notes so that you can check them out. So
good stuff.
Yeah.
I will say through my leadership journey, I've learned that in order to drive true sustainable change, you have to have this like bubble of the people, the mindsets, behaviors, capabilities, and treat that as equally as you would an operating system with the machine parts and the OEE or whatever performance metrics that you come with it. When you have balance between the two, that's when the real power happens.
Working with Phil in two different operating environments. He actually was part of a big consumer products company when I first met him, and then I know both of us worked with him when he was with a big medical device company. Again, what I think stands out is a lot of times earlier in your career, you really focus a lot on your technical capabilities. And I think what he was pointing out there is if you go in either as an engineer or a technician or just a technically minded individual and you think it's all about the systems or the equipment or the process, you're just going to find out that no, the people will either make that thing work or they won't.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose also when you think about systems and machines tend to run as well as they're built. So, and they don't get to have bad days and they don't generally have good days. I know we joke and we say, oh, my computer is not getting along with me, but at the end of the day, it just does exactly what it's programmed to do. And even something as complex as CNC machines, they also just do what they're programmed to do. Same with the process. The process runs the way it's been set up. And so in so many cases, we're looking at something we think is maybe a technical situation or issue, and it's the people behind it we need to work with and understand and try and get out of the rut or remove an obstacle. So it's so often, and I think that's probably what he's run into, is these situations where there's almost an overemphasis put on the technical solution or problem when really he's going, you need to leverage your people power. You need to really see that as an equal, if not maybe more important, in order to get that sustainable change. I mean, a process doesn't change just because you buy a new machine necessarily. The people have to buy into the change and get behind it.
Well, and I think of our frontline leadership program where we talk about leading change and how most of the reasons that change gets slowed down and it doesn't accelerate is because of the resistance of the people, not necessarily that the solution itself wasn't technically sound. The other thing I'd say is if people who've been watching the Accelerating Operational Performance podcast have noticed, there were several guests who made similar points, and I would just ask people to go back and think about that. Like I'm thinking of other guests saying that again, it turned out it was just a human error that was causing the problem, or they learned the hard way that even though they were beating their heads against the proverbial wall, it was really because the operators were resisting moving forward. And once they embraced that and learned how to tap into the power of the people, that's what the acceleration of the change really occurred.
Yeah. You brought up an interesting point, which is, of course, as we were picking, which episodes should we talk about? Some was based on, some of that criteria was, which episodes were the most popular? Which ones did people watch and listen to the most? But also our own insights as we listened and went, oh, that was a really good point. I'd either forgotten about that or just forgotten what a good nugget it is. And what's kind of neat is, as you mentioned, so many times when we look back at little nuggets from the episodes, and in particular some of the stuff we picked to share today, it does come back to this idea of people power, the idea of getting your team involved. And I think that's really cool because sometimes leadership can seem so complex, convoluted. There's 1,000 different leadership courses you can take, and every single one is going to tell you how to do leadership a little bit differently. And yet I think it comes back to what you mentioned earlier with that idea of a coach or a good coach involving the team, clarifying expectations, and building on positives. Like, how cool is that thousands and thousands of issues and problems that every leader runs into in every industry, not just in manufacturing, where we tend to focus, but in any industry, is just clarify those expectations, involve the team a bit more, build on the positives. So I think that's what's really neat as we saw that. And with that, I think we should probably talk about our third clip, right?
Yeah. Well, I will point out that before we launch into that, that when I think of all the companies who have conversations with us, and I do a lot of those preliminary conversations, and I know you do some too, I would say that the common theme in those is that they've been trying to do things like lean and continuous improvement and increase automation, and they've been stymied in some way because they've learned that if they're frontline leaders who are usually promoted from within based on being good operators and technicians, they just don't know how to tap into the power of the people. And so our guests really, of course, lived that and shared those experiences with us.
Absolutely, yeah. And to move on to our next clip, he really gets this idea of understanding people and understanding culture, right? It was your colleague Mike Kerr, who you've worked with for a fair bit, known for a number of years. I love this episode. I mean, all of the episodes are interesting. There's always lots to learn, but this one really just left me with a smile on my face. I actually listened to this one as opposed to watch it because, of course, we have them on YouTube and and on podcast platforms like Spotify and whatnot. But this one I listened to, and I mean, I didn't see you or Mike, but I could hear the smile in your voices, which was kind of cool. And his whole thing is speaking about company culture and the culture of an organization. It's about how and humor is a big thing. And not humor as in always cracking jokes and being the funny guy or the class clown, but humor as in people feeling good about work and having fun and putting a smile on.
And not taking yourself too seriously.
And not taking yourself seriously.
Yeah.
And I think Mike did that well. The clip that I was thinking about that I really liked was when he talks about the difference between management and leadership, or being a manager and being a leader. What I like about it so much is that we hear, you could Google what's the difference, and in a lot of ways you'll get quite similar maybe definitions. And I think the way he puts it is kind of clever. It's funny, and so it made me laugh.
Yeah. So one thing to know about Mike Kerr is, and you'll see this in our guest selection in the AOP podcast, it's really a combination of, there's a lot of people we've done work with. Mike is just someone I have known through the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. There's no doubt if you listen to the episode and see Mike, he is a Hall of Fame speaker, and you can see why, and a lot of people really connected with his message.
Yeah.
There's a fundamental difference between being a manager and being a leader. I think it's difficult to lead paperwork or to lead a timesheet, right? That's the stuff of management, all the stuff you're doing, all the bureaucracy, the filing, the paperwork, all that kind of stuff is management. When it comes to leadership, though, that's about energizing, interacting with your people. I don't know how many of you out there who are married have tried to manage your spouse. It's a really effective way to find out how comfortable your couch is.
All right, so I love that clip. Again, it's one of those short clips, but there's just so much. You can't lead paperwork. When have you ever led paperwork? Just that example. Again, you can Google what is the difference between management and leadership, and you get all of these convoluted, maybe complex definitions that are trying to find the perfect. And he just says it. Can you how often do you lead paperwork?
Yeah.
And I just went, huh. That's it, right there. You lead people, you don't lead paperwork.
Well, what struck me from it as I think about it, and you know that in the Frontline Leadership Program, we have this leadership style section. We talk about autocratic leaders, coach type leaders, and there's a leader type called the conformist, which is really fixated on like policies and procedures and checklists, right? And what we say in the course is that person often uses those things as a shield. But one thing you could take from what Mike Kerr said is that a leader who is overly fixated even on all the bureaucratic elements of their job, which still have to get done, I think it takes away from their time to really make a difference from a leadership perspective on people.
Yeah. Well, and he says in that clip, you're exactly right, and he says, you want to engage and excite people and involve people, and if you're spending all of your time trying to lead paperwork and lead tasks, so it's sort of like you manage tasks and you lead people, and if you're spending all of your time managing tasks, when do you have time to lead and engage and excite and invigorate your people?
Yeah.
You don't.
So a more complicated topic around this is I see a lot of companies struggling with they've burdened their people with a lot of tasks, and then they wonder why they're not creating a culture of engagement and being more personable. And you just look at their to-do list or their agenda for the day, and they've got either too many meetings that they're a part of, or there's just too much paperwork. Every division or department in the company is asking the frontline leader to do something with that, or report to them. And then we wonder why they're not building these kind of relationships that bring excellence in the work team.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about being able to empower and delegate when possible. I think it's about maybe asking yourself, depending on how much control you have over your schedule, do I have too many meetings? And also, interestingly, you mentioned meetings, but meetings can be an interesting time to lead people. Right. So are you using those meetings to shuffle administrative tasks and just get the work done? Or are you using meetings to reinvigorate and excite your team by talking about shared goals, by getting their opinions and buy-in and engaging them?
Or just to get alignment. Now with Mike Kerr, we had actually this problem. That was one of our clips that we really wanted to highlight. And by the way, I hate to use the word favorite because that's like saying, well, who's your favorite child? But we had to highlight one other thing that just caught both of our attentions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone, especially this day and age, has to think of themselves first and foremost as a culture leader. For the simple fact that we know no matter what organization you're in, what industry you're in, what business you're in, how big or small your organization is, culture is the number one driver of success. It is your number one competitive advantage. It affects absolutely every aspect of how your business operates. It affects how happy your employees are and therefore how productive they are and how present they are at work. It affects employee turnover rates, how well you can attract great employees. It affects the stress levels and resiliency in your workplace, how well your employees communicate with one another and work in teams effectively. It affects your customer service and your customer experience. I mean, every aspect of your organization is affected by culture.
Culture is your number one driver of success. Culture is your competitive advantage. I think that line is just so powerful and really puts a hold on, when you are a culture leader, like he says, you're always thinking about what can you do to improve the culture, and knowing it's your competitive advantage. And he goes on to say how many things it impacts, turnover, engagement, all of these things. That's pretty powerful.
It is, and I think that sometimes leaders at the supervisor level or sometimes in middle management think that culture is something that the senior executives or the really top executives in the company, if it's a big company, are in charge of. But people probably don't realize that you actually create a subculture in your team. So even if, because sometimes leaders will complain, the overall culture here kind of isn't as good as it could be. And the question is, what are you doing to make the subculture of your group better? Because I ask people in our classes sometimes, we'll say, is there just one culture? Is it possible that an employee's experience in one department or one shift might be quite different from what it is in another shift or another department? And they say, yes, there is a difference.
Well, you know what that makes me think of, Greg? I mean, you're exactly right that this idea that culture is handed down by the higher-ups or senior management and operations management, and that everybody's just going to follow the same culture. I mean, we all live in a country, and that country is split up into different states or provinces, and then that's split up into different municipalities. And I mean, there's a reason people move from one place to another because they go, well, life is better in that place, or people like it more, or I like it more. If culture was truly just this thing that's sort of handed down from the higher ups, wouldn't we all kind of feel the same no matter what town or province or state or city we lived in? And yet that's not the case, because you're right, there's these subcultures that get created, whether it's in a workplace or in a city. We have these subcultures, and we're creating that every day with our interactions and the things we do as a leader or don't do. So I totally agree that maybe you can't necessarily change the words on the wall, and you can't set different mission, visions, and values of our organization, but I absolutely think you can affect the culture.
Yeah. And since you brought up words on the wall, the last comment I'll make on that is to recognize that a lot of companies have posters where they talk about what they value. But I just want to remind people that what you value is what you talk about, what you train people on, what you comment on, what you measure. And so really people are discerning your values through your conduct and what you focus on, right, as a leader. And then speaking of, a great leader, I was thinking about another clip, another episode of the podcast where we had Lori Da Silva on. And Lori Da Silva is the most recent retired CEO of the London Convention Center. And she has decades of experience in the hospitality industry. And I've had the opportunity to be part of Rotary International with her through a Rotary Club that we have in the city. I've also got to do a number of projects with her team. And I noticed that her successor is actually someone that came from within, which again just shows you the power of a great leader and the kind of trail they leave behind in a good way.
Yeah.
And what was it specifically that you were thinking of from Lori's clip?
Well, I was thinking there was that part where she talks about going in for a job interview, and there were multiple job openings, and so at one point in the interview they kind of go, what job are you actually applying for?
And I went for the interview, and I actually knew one of the a former colleague who was working for that organization, which is how I was connected. But I went for the interview, and I was being interviewed by one of their vice presidents. And halfway through the interview, he actually said to me, "I'm sorry, what position are you applying for?" Because they were also looking for a director of sales. And of course, I was a current director of sales. And I stopped him and said, "No, I'm not applying for the director of sales position. I want to be the general manager." So I think that for me was probably that turning point when I went, "Aha, I've got this, and I'm going for it."
And that job she did get. And if you think about it, the boldness of in a job interview, first of all, having the interviewer say, which job are you actually applying for? Which I thought, that's interesting by itself, because they were hiring for the two positions, but obviously he picked up some signals that she wasn't just interested in a lateral move to a similar job being the director of sales. She wanted more. So, and for her to have the boldness to basically stake her claim and say, "No, I'm interested in the general manager's role." And I thought, talk about I guess having the confidence to be clear about what you want and then say what you want.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we've talked a couple times now about part of being a good leader and a coach is clarifying expectations. And here, before she got the job, she was essentially already clarifying expectations by saying, no, I'm definitely here for this other job. When I suppose, had she wanted to play it safe, getting asked a question like that, you could go, "Oh, maybe I'm sending signals that I just want to be the director of sales because that's where I'm coming from. That's where my experience is." But like you said, she took this bold step to say, "No, I'm not here for that. I want something more."
Most of us probably would go, "Well, I'd accept either job," right? But no, she made it clear what she wanted, and I just think that talk about demonstrating probably what they were looking for anyway in somebody who would become a general manager. Not that you want an autocratic person, but you want somebody bold enough to be decisive once they see all the information to just make the right decision.
Yeah, because if you go back to that coach, it's not, yes, it's involving the team and clarifying expectations, but another thing the coach does well is they stay on track and they still get results through their people. So you still have to have this drive and ambition. It's not always about coddling or always kind of only thinking of the team. It's really about getting results through the team. So I think, like you said, it's not autocratic to still be driven, to be ambitious, and to kind of know what you're after and know what the goal is.
Yeah, and because I've known Lori Lori for so long, I saw the way that she would treat her team as their leader, because after she got that job that she's talking about, then came up the job to be part of the London Convention Centre, which is now RBC Place London, a very large regional conference and convention centre.
Yeah.
And what I see is every time that the organization faced a challenging time, if you go back and watch the entire episode, she also talks about, what COVID did to the convention business and how they responded to that, but also just that she always nourished and helped her team grow and develop for their own capabilities and confidence. And as a result, in a business that has a lot of turnover, she always engendered a very high level of retention, which I think, again, speaks to the power of leadership. The other comment I'd make is that, and it came up even recently in our business, where I think people underestimate how a leader affects the health and well-being of the people who report to that leader. If you've ever had a bad boss, you know the stress that comes with it and how that affects you outside of work. At the same time, when you have a pretty good supportive boss, it generally makes you feel healthier. You're not as stressed out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we say that stress is, I think they say sitting and stress are the silent killers, right? And stress impacts so many other areas of your physical health, your mental health. And so I think you're right. There's that sort of old idea that, drop your emotional baggage at the door when you show up at work each day. We know that that's not true. We know that you can't do that. And the same thing happens the other way around. It's not like if you're really stressed at work and like you said, your boss makes you feel terrible and makes you feel either insecure or, not satisfactory enough or whatever. You don't go home and walk in the door and everything's great. It doesn't matter. You're going to take that baggage back. So you're right. A good boss, a good leader has impacts both in your work day, but also when you get home and you can have a more probably fulfilling, stress-free life.
If you've got a busy to-do list, I think the mistake you make is you think that people are machines, and they're not. They're human beings, and they're mostly emotionally driven, not logically driven. And so if you don't tend to those emotional needs, you're probably going to be seeing subpar performance and results. And Lori definitely demonstrated that. I know it's something that we try to propagate and teach through our programs as well.
Yeah, I think it was Mike Kerr in his episode that he mentioned something about, you're a good leader whether people are more excited whether you enter the room or whether you leave the room. And it makes me think of Lori because, of course, as you mentioned, Lori recently retired. And, when we had a meeting with them about a program we were doing, there wasn't excitement about her leaving. There were people going, we're going to miss her a lot. And I think that's a great sign for her to show that clearly you are valued, you're a well-liked leader, because people are not waiting to shut the door behind you. They're kind of going, any chance you might want to stay a little longer? And you're the one saying, hey, folks, I've been a good leader, yes, but you folks can do this. You can handle this. You've got the skills and the abilities and the know-how to do this without me. And I think that takes a lot to be the kind of leader that doesn't sort of take their success with them out the door, that says, no, I want to make sure that I'm leaving you in good hands, because it wasn't all about me and sort of my perfect leadership style. It was actually about what we accomplished as a team, and you'll continue to function once I'm gone.
Yeah, and that reminds me of one of the main objectives in our program, right? When we first launched our Frontline Leadership course, we talk about there's really three objectives. One, help you be a better leader with a little less stress, build your confidence and your capability. We talk about improving the business. But the third one is, what kind of legacy are you going to leave behind in terms of your impact on people? And I think too many leaders, again, think compartmentalization. It's just the job and getting the work tasks done. And you don't know that either in a positive way or potentially in a negative way, you're going to have a lasting impression on people. Or maybe worse, you're going to be totally forgettable. And you're interchangeable with the mass of all the other supervisors and managers they worked for. So I just think that, once you get past the, mastering of the basic job tasks, we're all called to think a little bit bigger as far as the impact that we're having on society at large, but also the people that are put under our leadership.
Yeah. And, to kind of round things out, you mentioned about thinking about what your impact is. I think what's cool is that every guest you've had on the podcast so far, on the AOP podcast, and especially these four that we've just heard from and talked about, they've thought about that. They've thought about what do they want their impact to be? And so whether it was, in the case of a few of them staying in kind of the workforce where they were and having a positive role, or others where they decided to leave what they were doing to make a bigger impact in the world, they've thought about that. They've had the awareness to go, I want it to be different. I want it to be better. And look at the legacy that they've all created thanks to that.
Yeah, I mean, again, just another demonstrated value of the guests' perspectives, which are just totally amazing. And so, that is bringing us to the end of our little wrap up and look back over all the episodes. But when I think of the Accelerating Operational Performance podcast, it is very difficult to choose just one episode over any others. We've got a bunch of guests lined up going into the future. It's one of the highlights of my job is to do those interviews. And so if you're not currently a subscriber, remember you can do that on almost any podcasting platform. And you can also, if you're curious, you can watch it on video on YouTube. So look forward to seeing you in the future Accelerating Operational Performance podcast. Thanks, Kirk.